Again, good evening, Drew family. Good evening, Drew family. Good evening. That's not how we do it, Drew. Good evening, Drew family. Good evening. Do you realize that we're at the only HBCU west of the Mississippi, other than Langston, of course, but in Oklahoma? But I mean, we are privileged to be here. A lot of us thought this time last year this institution would be here. Good evening, Drew family.
Good evening.
Thank you, baby. And speaking of babies, we have some beautiful children in the room, and it's just beautiful that the parents have decided to make this a family event, because truly the guests and the panelists here want to inform our communities, our families, that we have some work to do. We have to prevent this psychoacademic warfare, and we have the heavy hitters here that have been in the trenches for so long. Without further ado, because this brother needs all his time, I'm going to bring up Dr. Johnson. It's a couple of things you just need to know about him that I found fascinating. Number one, I've been following him for a while. I'm surprised I don't have stalking charges. If he wasn't on the East Coast, I would probably have a case against me. I have watched him from afar, an admirer of his work. I found his work on the wounded womb very interesting. I also found out that he is a blood relative of Frederick Douglass. So the genius runs deep. In addition, he is a father to a 9-year-old daughter, and he has something on his site that I found really interesting. He has a quote that says, "Free your mind and the body will follow." So truly, we're here to liberate our minds today, and without further ado, I want to bring up Dr. Umar Abdullah Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I come to you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, my second home, because Africa is the first. And it's just glad to be here. I've never been west of Austin, Texas, or Chicago. So this is the furthest west that I've ever been. Hopefully it won't be my last time here. What I want to do in the first 90 minutes of tonight's program, before we get into the panel discussion, from which I'm sure you will draw a lot of very valuable and useful information, I want to go over some things that I think you need to know. The Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, the gentleman who gave us the largest black mass movement in modern history, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, which he gave to the world in 1914. He said that if the Negro is not careful, he will drink in all the poison of Western civilization and die from the effects of it. If the Negro is not careful, you would drink in all the poison of Western civilization and die from the effects of it. And when we talk about poison, we have to talk about the poisons of Western psychology. The poisons of Western psychology. First and foremost, we have to recognize something, that Sigmund Freud, from whom we get the theory of psychoanalysis, we have to recognize that that gentleman, that European gentleman, spent a lot of time in Africa. He actually studied the mystery systems of Kemet and Nile Valley civilization. His philosophy of psychoanalysis was nothing more than a stolen version of Nile Valley spiritual systems. You have to understand that Carl Jung also studied African spirituality. In fact, if you ever get a hold of one of the pictures of Sigmund Freud's office, his office looks like the office of a black psychologist, because it's tattooed with the statues, pictures of African deities from the Nile Valley culture. So we got to recognize, when we talk about psychology, we're talking about a stolen African spirituality. And what we have to do is re-Africanize the psychology. One of the biggest problems with Western psychology as it is used on black people is that it denies the existence of spirit. It denies the existence of spirit.
Yes.
And we, being God's first people and God's spirited people, whenever you seek to heal black folk and you don't talk about the spirit, then you're never going to heal black people. And as a result of that, we're not being healed by white psychology, because it denies the essential essence of who we are, and that is that black self, that black dark matter. It is the soul of the African people. And so we ultimately have to develop PhD programs in African psychology. We just can't take white psychology and paint it black no more. We need our own thing. And now that we see that there's a lot of social issues that are now being treated as normal biological developments, we need a true African-centered psychology right now. For example, we have the big movement that's going around the country that everyone's talking about, and that's the homosexual movement. And irrespective of whether you believe homosexuality to be natural or not, we got to recognize one thing, that historically it is anti-African. Historically. Nowhere in African civilization prior to the coming of the European do you find a word for homosexual behavior. Nowhere do you find a culture of homosexual behavior. Now, when we go to Greece and Rome, we'll find that many of the gods of Greece and Rome were homosexual. Apollo was homosexual. Zeus was homosexual. Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Greco-Roman culture gave birth to homosexual behavior. Does that mean that we should chive, reject, or deride our homosexual brothers and sisters? Not at all. But it does mean we must be crystal clear intellectually as to where this behavior comes from. Because cultural imperialism is a serious problem in the black community, and homosexuality is just one example of cultural imperialism, forgetting who you are and swallowing up someone else's existence. So, first thing we got to recognize, that psychology is totally political. Every institution in American society is political, but psychology is one of the most political of them all. For example, if we go back in history, we'll find that during slavery, enslaved Africans used to be diagnosed with a disease called drapetomania. Drapetomania was a psychiatric syndrome. Drapetomania was a disease that led the slave to believe that he had a right to be free. Could you imagine that? If you were an enslaved African, to believe that you had a right to be free was considered a disorder. Dr. Samuel Cartwright was the European who came up with drapetomania. And what was the cure for drapetomania? He said, quote, to whip the living hell out of the slave. So that means that Nat Turner had drapetomania, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Toussaint L'Ouverture, Bookman Dada, Emperor Dessalines, all of them had drapetomania because they had a right or belief that they had a right to be free from European rule and domination. And then we have to talk about nigritude. Nigritude was another psychiatric disorder that was given to us by who? Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence. He was the dean of psychiatry at Pennsylvania Hospital. And this European, who later became president of the anti-slavery movement despite being a racist. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? He said that black folks had a disease that made our brains totally useless and feeble-minded. And he said the number one symptom of nigritude was black skin. And he warned white folk that you should not rub up against black people or you could catch nigritude. And to show you that psychology still has not gotten far away from drapetomania and nigritude is when we look at the back of the DSM-4 right now. Today, guess whose picture's on the back? Dr. Benjamin Rush, 1844. Well, guess what, people? I would argue that ADHD is the new drapetomania. Conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder is the new nigritude. It is the taking of normal African behavior and pathologizing it. But the sickness is so many of us have bought into these different syndromes. Half the children that are sent to me for an ADHD evaluation don't have ADHD at all. They have what I call absence of my daddy from home disorder. 75% of black boys without fathers at home. 75% of the black boys diagnosed with ADHD don't have their fathers at home because they're too busy being locked up in prison. So is this really a psychiatric issue? Or is this a criminology issue? Is this really a psychiatric issue? Or is it a social science issue? Yeah. And then they pump them full of drugs. Ritalin and Cyclone, Strattera. And then we got young boys taking antipsychotic medicines, Risperdal and Depakote. You don't even develop schizophrenia until your late 20s, early 30s. So if you don't develop schizophrenia until your late 20s and early 30s, why are 7 and 8-year-old boys being given antipsychotic medicine? It's because in the United States of America, you can legally prescribe a drug to deal with a problem that it was not designed for. So guess what? They're giving boys Risperdal and Depakote so we can do what? Arrest the aggression and calm down the anger. Arrest the aggression and calm down the anger. So you got boys taking this medicine that isn't even developed for childhood brains. And we know that in the year 2000, the Food and Drug Administration decided what? In the year 2000, at the turn of the 21st century, that you can give children adult psychiatric medicines. See, one thing we got to understand about the Food and Drug Administration is that it's a big hoax. And many of the administrators who work for the FDA have financial stock vested in the very same drugs and foods that they're supposed to be protecting you from. So let me ask you a question. If I work for the FDA and someone's asking me to determine whether or not a certain drug should be used on children, and I know that if this drug is approved for use on children, I stand to make $2 or $3 million overnight by approving this unhealthy drug, what are the chances that I'm going to come back and say that the drug is not good? So you see, half the stuff that you eat and half the medicines that we are taking are killing us because it's all about the profit motive. And how much money are they making on Wall Street by prescribing these medicines? $50 billion a year just off brain drugs. $50 billion a year just off Raheem not being able to sit still long enough. But nobody's talking about the fact that the teacher who's teaching Raheem doesn't have any effective instructional pedagogy, and as a result of that, Raheem is inattentive and hyperactive, not because he can't sit still, but because you're not giving him anything for which he should direct his attention. We have to stop letting our children get blamed for failures of the system. When you go through the history of black people, you'll find that through our sojourn in America, different disorders were used to control revolutionary black people. That's right, one of those disorders was what? Insanity. During Reconstruction and towards the end of slavery, any free black person who dared challenge white supremacy, any free black person who dared challenge the institution of slavery was diagnosed with insanity and put in insane asylums against their will. One of the things we fail to realize that a mental hospital is far more controlling than a jail cell.
Yes.
Why would you rather go to jail than go to a mental hospital? Because in jail, you have a right to a speedy trial. In jail, you have a right to a jury in front of your peers. But when you are held against your will in a mental hospital, involuntary committal because somebody think you're crazy, you do not have a right to a jury of your peers. And you do not have a right to a speedy trial. And that's why every mental health hospital in America has a judge assigned to it, who periodically have to go there and hear arguments on behalf of patients who want to get out of the hospital. But the staff are saying we believe that they need to stay. And it is the judge who decides whether you stay or go. So psychological incarceration is worse than political incarceration. Many states have mandatory laws that allow black folk or anybody who's taking psychiatric medicine to be arrested for failure to take their medicine. Did you know that? If you are diagnosed with a disorder and you are prescribed medicine and you do not take that medicine, nearly every state in this country has a law. All those rarely exercised can be, whenever the system decides to be, that you can be arrested for not taking your medication. Very important that we recognize that. Schizophrenia was used against black revolutionaries in the 60s. Do you know that during the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement, a lot of black people were pulled off the street who were picketed and boycotting, and they were diagnosed with schizophrenia. And they were locked up in mental health hospitals. Yes, indeed, do your research on this. Black folk who had absolutely nothing wrong with them were diagnosed as schizophrenia. Why? Because if you wanted to incarcerate, you would not be able to incarcerate through the justice system unless you have just cause. So in the mental health setting, you don't necessarily have to have just cause. You just have to have a belief that the black person is crazy. So any black person who believes that they have a right to overcome white supremacy is somehow insane. Then you got to talk about the anti-spirituality of psychology. I often argue one of the reasons why the success rates of therapy with black folk is so low is because it does not incorporate our spiritual nature. You cannot deal with black people without dealing with the spirit. And that's why sometimes a religious counselor can be far more effective with a black client than someone with a doctorate degree and 20 years experience. Why? Because the spiritual counselor is dealing with the soul directly, and the intellectual academic is only dealing with his theories. So if you're going to use Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler and Carl Jung to deal with black folk exclusively without dealing with who we are as spiritual beings, you're not going to get very far. And so many of us are suffering from a spiritual famine in America. Many of us have bought into what? The commercialism of American culture. You got a lot of black people who are trying to deal with their personal problems by doing what? Overconsumption. And right now we're in the Christmas era. This is the worst period of overconsumption for American black folk. In most cities in this country, most of us will spend anywhere from $1 to $10 billion on Christmas gifts alone. $1 to $10 billion on Christmas gifts alone. But at the same time, we cry and we argue about the state of education for our children, and particularly our boys. But how about the fact that if we took our Christmas money, we could build an independent school for every black boy in the United States of America? We can say goodbye to special education. We can say goodbye to misdiagnosed and learning disabilities. We can say goodbye to misdiagnosed and ADHD. But the problem is slavery engineered within us a psyche where we're half African and still half slave. And as long as you still have slave, you can never actually operate as a free person. Because see, there's something called freedom, F-R-E-E-D-O-M, and then there's something called freedom, F-R-E-E-D-U-M-B. And black people are operating under freedom, D-U-M-B. Too dumb to recognize that you're still enslaved. And so we got to recognize until we come out from under that psychosis, it's going to be difficult to get anything else done. A lot of times when I go around lecturing on special education, one of the questions that I'm often asked about is mental giftedness. People always want to know why so few black children, or children of color for that matter, but particularly the black children, why so few of us are being diagnosed as mentally gifted? Why is it that when you look at the mild mental retardation rate, it's through the ceiling? When you look at the learning disability rate, it's through the ceiling. When you look at the ADHD rate, it's through the ceiling. But when you look at mental giftedness, why is it so low? That's because you got to study the history of racism in order to understand the history of mental giftedness. We know that David Wechsler, who gave us the most popular intelligence test used today, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale 4th edition, actually participated in the standardization of this WIS-4 that we currently use. But David Wechsler, who was a eugenicist and a profound racist and hater of black people, conducted several studies on gifted people where he concluded that black folk did not have the aptitude to allow them to be MG. And so from Wechsler's work, a white woman by the name of Mary Hollingsworth or Stallings picked up the gifted movement. And in 1954, the same year as Brown versus Board, in 1954, the same year as Brown versus Board, there was a push to bring mental giftedness into the schools. Why did they bring mental giftedness into the schools in 1954 thereabout? So that white people who didn't want their white children in the same integrated classroom with your black children could resegregate their children, and because they can no longer say it's because they were black, they would simply argue that the white children were too intelligent to remain in the classroom with the black children. You still see the same thing today. Go into almost any school that's racially diverse and you'll find that the white children are overrepresented amongst gifted, and the black kids, if there's any at all, MG, are underrepresented amongst gifted. And one of the biggest racist strategies that I see school psychologists use to keep black children from being diagnosed and placed in gifted support classroom is an IQ score less than 130. Now in the world of intelligence, 90 to 109 is average intelligence. Roughly 110 to 119 is high average, 120 is superior. But the nationally recognized cutoff for mental gifted IQ is 130, very superior. But guess what? Most mental gifted laws of best practice dictate that what? You cannot use an IQ score alone. You cannot rely on the intelligence quotient score alone to determine whether or not a child is gifted. So what's happening is black parents are being told that their children do not qualify for gifted because they have a 128 IQ. Your child is not gifted because they have a 129 IQ. Your child is not gifted because they have a 125 IQ. So you have to understand that although your son or daughter did not hit 130, they still qualify for the program if you can demonstrate that they have ability that supersedes the instruction of the regular class. And then I also find in my working relationship between what? ADHD and mental giftedness. What do I find? Many of our boys diagnosed with ADHD. Not all, but a significant proportion. The reason they can't sit still and pay attention is because they are bored. Intellectually, they're not being stimulated. But because the school is not interested in seeing whether or not Raheem is smart, they're only interested in Raheem standing still, so they're telling parents to go and get some medicine. Well, hold on now, we got an ethical issue. Because public school teachers are not trained as psychologists. Public school teachers are not trained as psychiatrists. So why is the black community, why are you letting public school teachers tell you that your child has a mental disorder and needs medication when they can't even tell you the criteria for the disorder in the first place. So the next time a teacher tells you your son needs drugs or has ADHD, you need to write a letter to the who? Superintendent of school, and the chair of the school board, and the secretary of education, and your state senator, and your state rep, and the governor, and the mayor, letting them know that you have a teacher in this school who is operating outside of her boundaries of professional expertise. The black community has to stop letting people just do whatever they want to do with us and do with our kids anything that they want. Because I'm getting sick and tired of the kids being blamed for the failure of the system. And see, there's a little secret about public education that nobody likes to talk about, but I'll bring it up. And that is this. When we talk about black boys don't want to learn, you got to operationalize that lie. It's not that they don't want to learn. They don't want to learn at the hands of middle-class white women, many of whom don't give a damn about their future. We got to be honest. I'm in the schools. If we want to fix the problems that's affecting black boys, you got to give them black male teachers. If you give every black boy a black male teacher, a strong black male teacher, you cut suspension in half. A strong black male teacher, you cut learning disability diagnosis in half. You cut mild mental retardation in half. You cut expulsion in half. You cut the need for drugs in half. So if we know that all we got to do is put a black man in front of the black boys, why aren't we doing it? It's because the school system is designed to feed the prison system. The school systems are designed to feed the prison system. And if you look at the budget of the prison in any state, and you look at the budget of the schools, the prisons in most states get twice as much as the schools get. See, remember now, the reason you got public education in the first place was for what? The reason public education evolved in the 19th century into what it has become is because big business needed a low-wage earner who could do basic reading, basic writing, and basic math. But guess what? Once they start shipping industries to third world countries, and once they start snatching the factories out of the black community, there was no longer any factories for us to get jobs at. So when there was no longer an economy for the low-wage earner, what did the goal of public education become then? The goal of public education became two things. For black girls to prepare them for a life of poverty, and for black boys to prepare them for a life of prison. And that's why I tell the black community, we can keep on playing games with the school district all day, but you must do one or two things to save our sons. Number one, take over the school system, or number two, build your own schools. One or the other, there is nothing else. See, people often say, I want some strategies. We want some solutions. You know what the solution is. Problem is you don't love your children enough to bring about that solution. And that solution is independent schools. Because if you notice, black folk, you love to spend your money on anything except the right thing. You love to spend your money to have fun, but you don't love to spend your money to do right for the greater good of the whole race.
Speak now.
Now, when we talk about propaganda, and propaganda is a major issue when you're talking about psychology. Okay, you got to talk about propaganda, the science of mind control. Marcus Garvey taught us that the world was run by propaganda. Half the stuff you believe was nothing but a lie. Okay? What did Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, say about brainwashing people? What did Goebbels say? Goebbels said that if you want to control the way people think, he said, keep the lie simple. Keep the lie big. And keep saying it over and over again. Let me say it again. This is what they done. He said, keep the lie simple. Keep the lie big and keep repeating it. He said it's something within the nature of man, no matter how much you're lying to him, he has to believe it if you keep on saying it. So, when we look at television, we find that AOL, Time Warner, and Disney are the two largest media corporations in the world. Did you know that? When most of us think of Disney, we think of Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny. But Disney, okay, is one of the most powerful media corporations in the world. There's only 5 corporations that control 95% of everything you see on TV, listen to on the radio, or read out the bookstore. That's right. 5 of them. AOL, Time Warner, and Disney are at the top. Then you have Bertelsmann, Viacom, and Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. These are the 5 giants. Did you know that the FBI and CIA by themselves publish over 18,000 magazines and books every year, filled with misinformation? What did we learn from Goebbels? Goebbels said that in a country ruled by lies, the truth is the mortal enemy of the state. In a country ruled by lies, the truth is the mortal enemy of the state. So you have to get the truth And the truth of the matter is we let our children watch too much television. The truth of the matter is we let our boys spend too much time on the basketball court and on the football field. I'm getting sick and tired of going to conferences with folks who don't look like us who ask me the same questions time and time again. If black children are not intellectually inferior to white or Asian children, how do you explain the fact that the Asians are getting the highest test scores, and the white kids are getting the second highest test scores, and the black and Hispanic kids are getting the lowest test scores? If you're not intellectually inferior, why do we constantly find a 15-point test score gap between black and white and Asian? I said it's real simple and it got nothing to do with eugenics. The first answer is that every test in America was designed by middle-class white people for the benefit of middle-class white people. That's the first question. The second answer is what? The average middle-class Asian child spends 15 hours a week studying outside of school. The average middle-class white kid spends about 8 hours a week studying outside of school. And the average Negro boy, because you got him growing up thinking he's going to the NFL or the NBA, only spends 45 minutes a week studying outside of school. So this has nothing to do with intellectual inferiority. In fact, the late great Dr. Amos Wilson, a Harvard psychologist, said what? When you study the intelligence rates of babies, when you study the intelligence of babies, you will find that African infants outperform the infants of any other race group. So why does that never come up in a discussion? And isn't it somehow interesting that the average IQ score of a black child goes down as they go up in school?
Yes, wow.
The average IQ score of a black child goes down the more they go up. So if I'm getting stupider, the more that I'm learning, that I must be miseducated for oppression. How much money on mind control? $500 billion a year is what they spend. In America, you got 1,400 TV stations, 4 major networks, 10,000 radio stations, 1,500 daily papers, 7,000 weekly papers, 17,000 magazines, and 9 film studios, including that Tyler Perry nonsense. Here's a man who got rich taking images of black people from slavery. The Mammy, the Sambo, the Uncle Tom, and the Pickaninny. And he took images from the plantation, flipped them, remixed them, and now he's a billionaire off of teaching self-made. Every Tyler Perry movie you watch got what? A whole bunch of desperate single black women who can't seem to fix their problems and a bunch of black men who can't seem to be able to take responsibility. But when you study the psychohistory of a Tyler Perry, you find what? That he was a victim of child sex abuse. And we don't poke fun at our brother because we don't like child sex abuse, and there's too much child sex abuse that we see in the black community that we're turning a deaf eye to. Are y'all listening to me? Yeah. But when you look at Tyler Perry's psychohistory, his trauma, his pain, it comes out in his work. Yeah. And on the subject of child sex abuse, black people, we got to do a better job of protecting our little folk. Yes. Too many of our children. Nearly every week I'm getting a phone call to do therapy with another black boy or girl who's being molested. Yes. And you know what's so sick about the molestation? They're not being molested at daycare. They're not being molested at school. They're not being molested at summer camp. They're being molested by blood relatives. Yes. They're being molested by blood relatives. So when we look at the Eddie Long situation, we say, well, that was bad. How could those women in the church know that this was going on and do nothing about it? Or we look at the Penn State situation and we say that's bad. How can Joe Paterno know that was going on and do nothing about it? But I say look in your own house. Yeah. There's some pedophilia and incest in your own house. Maybe not in your immediate nuclear family, but within your extended family. Right. There's some incest and pedophilia and no one's doing anything about it. Uncle Johnny been molesting nieces for 10 years and he still ain't been forced to get no help. Because we don't want to turn Uncle Johnny in. But at the same time, we let Uncle Johnny turn all the nieces and nephews out. Intelligence testing. Did you know that the concept of the intelligence test came out of Hitler's Germany? There's a European by the name of William Stern who came up with the intelligence quotient, the belief that you can put a number to how smart somebody is. So when people start talking about black children having low IQ scores, you gotta ask yourself, was the intelligence quotient designed for black children to have high IQ scores? And first of all, the reason how they get us on the intelligence quotient, I saw a marker up there earlier. Who moved the marker? There was a dry erase marker up here and somebody took it.
I did.
I need my marker. Here we go. I moved. ADHD. And I'm going to read y'all the criteria for ADHD in a minute so you can see how ridiculous it is. Let me show you how black kids keep underperforming on the IQ test, which was developed anyway for racial extermination. In fact, when they did the research on the Jews who were exterminated in the internment camps by Adolf Hitler, guess what they found? on the top of every file of every exterminated Jew was an IQ score. They legitimized the extermination through intelligence. And intelligence testing is a child of eugenics. Psychology is a child of eugenics. Who came up with the word eugenics and the concept? Francis Galton, the father of the individual study of differences in psychology. Francis Galton was cousin to Charles Darwin. Francis Galton coined the term eugenics, which means good stock. He said that Europeans need to do what? Eliminate the genotype of any other race that threatens their own, or otherwise they might bring down the general intelligence of their own people. So psychology gave birth to racial extermination. So when you look at IQ, for example, you got the full scale IQ, right? And then you got your subdomains. You got your working memory index, you got your verbal comprehension index, you got your nonverbal reasoning index, and then you got your mental processing speed, right? So this is overall IQ, and then you got your 4 IQ areas: working memory, verbal comprehension, nonverbal reasoning, and mental speed. Now when you look at the processing speed of black children compared to white and Asians, it's average. If you look at the working memory of black children compared to white and Asians, it's average. When you look at the nonverbal reasoning scores of black children compared to white and Asian, it's average. But when you talk about the verbal comprehension, are y'all listening to me? That's when we drop. So it's not that black children are less intelligent than other children. They don't understand the verbal concepts that are on the test, which are deliberately chosen to be difficult for black children to perpetuate the stereotype of racial inferiority. Psychiatric medicine. Did you know that in the 1960s, the United States government funded a long-term study to see what the ultimate side effects would be on the community that was doped into submission? See, the reason you got crack cocaine is because of what? The Black Power movement. In the 1970s, the government said, look, we can't keep on dealing with these black radicals at home as long as we try to go and steal oil and drugs in other countries. So we got to find a way to keep these black folks docile. So somebody said, why don't we do to the black community the same thing the British did to the Chinese? Dope them up. And so they came in with crack cocaine. Crack cocaine was one of the most effective weapons used against the black community. How does it operate? Because if you got to worry about somebody climbing in your back window, stealing your television for a $5 bag of crack, how are you going to go to the political meeting to organize against oppression? Are y'all listening to me? Crack cocaine disorganizes the black community. And as long as you are disorganized, you can't organize. Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture told us what? The reason we don't get anywhere is because we're not organized. The parents are not organized. Black men are not organized. Black women are not organized. Black psychologists aren't as organized as we should be. Black medical doctors are not as organized. The doctors, we're not as organized as we should be, because to be organized is to be effective. To be organized is to be effective. Kwame Ture said if you organize a lot, you get a lot done. If you organize a little, you get a little bit done. But if you don't organize at all, you don't get anything done. The Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said what? The greatest weapon used against the Negro is disorganization. So you see, we got to recognize that there's people making billions of dollars off of black disorganization. I mean, look how many people whose houses and lives we're financing in the suburbs because we refuse to get our act together. How much money are doctors making off of these brain drugs? How much money are the halfway houses making? How much money are the therapy centers making off black folk who can't solve their own problem? Yes. So if you look at it, there's so much money invested in you doing wrong. Why in the hell would anybody want to do right? It's just like special education. Whenever I diagnose one of your children and put them in special education, the school, the district gets what? Double the money from the federal government. Right. Did you know that every time a child goes in special education, there's a 100% increase in funding for that baby? Yes. So for example, in Los Angeles County, let's say the average child gets $9,000 spent on their education. The minute Dr. Umar Johnson says he got a learning disability, or he's autistic, or he's emotionally disturbed and mentally retarded, instead of getting $9,000, the special ed kid is worth $18,000. Do y'all see that? Special ed is a business. It is the business of making money off miseducation. And guess what? Half the kids who are diagnosed with SLD, specific learning disability, don't have an SLD, they have an ABT. ABT is a label that I made up. You know what it stands for? Ain't been to hell taught. Are y'all listening to me? Yeah. He ain't been to hell taught. He's in 5th grade still reading on the 2nd grade level. Do you want to know why?
Because in second grade, they suspended him so much that he wasn't in class long enough to learn anything. In first grade, the teacher was on maternity leave half the school year, and he was flooded with 6 or 7 different substitutes for the rest of the year. In kindergarten, he had a teacher fresh out of college who couldn't tell if she was sleeping or awake. Are y'all listening to me? So why is he being put in special education? He ain't been taught. So people say, what should we do then? I mean, these kids are behind, Dr. Umar. What is your recommendation? If you don't want to put them in special ed, what should we do? Do what you're here to do in the first place. Teach them. The problem is there's no money to get children up to where they're supposed to be. The money is in the misdiagnosing. I know this for a fact. The money is in the misdiagnosing. Do you know what most school districts do in June? They get all their psychologists together, they have a big meeting. And everybody pulls out a list of all the kids they misdiagnosed for the year. And the school district goes through the list to make sure they didn't miss any names. Why? Because they want to make sure they don't lose out on none of that money coming from Obama. It is a hustle. And another reason why we see so few black children being diagnosed as mentally gifted is because MG has been taken out of the special ed law. MG is no longer a diagnosable condition under IDEIA, which means what? When I diagnose a kid as gifted, there's no extra money. So who is going to bother looking for black mentally gifted kids if they're not going to be paid for doing it? This is the situation. Miseducation. Absolutely ridiculous. Our boys are systematically miseducated. My good colleagues, Dr. Nathan and Julia here, say that a lot of our children participate in psychological dropout. And guess what? We fail to realize that there's really no such thing as a dropout rate in America when it comes to black children. There's only a black push-out rate. Our kids are pushed out by the treatment that they get. They are castrated psychologically and emotionally. They are degraded. They are treated like animals. And guess what else we find? And this is supported by the research. The darker the boy, and the thicker his hair, the more likely he is to be suspended. Yes, sir. We also find what? The darker the boy, the more likely he is to be diagnosed as mildly mentally retarded. The darker the boy, the more likely he is to be diagnosed as emotionally disturbed. In the United States of America, a black boy is 4 times as likely as a white boy to be diagnosed as retarded and 4 times less likely to be found mentally gifted.
That's right.
Did y'all hear that?
Yes.
4 times more likely to be diagnosed as retarded and 4 times less likely to be diagnosed as gifted. So that means what? There's only 2 conclusions you can draw. Black boys are intellectually inferior to white boys, or the system of miseducation is inherently evil. It's one or the other. It is absolutely one or the other. And for the black men in the audience, y'all know what I'm talking about because you've been through it. Yeah. And mothers, you got to be careful with your sons because sometimes your sons come home crying, Mommy, Grandmama, the teacher called me out of my name today. And instead of you investigate, you know what you say? Well, you must have done something wrong. You assume that your son did something wrong when he may not have. So if he can't go to the principal for help, and he can't come home to his mama for help, he chooses to go to his peer group for help, and that's called dropout.
That's right.
Listen to me clearly. I'm not saying that a white female can't teach a black boy to read. I'm not saying she can't teach him how to write. I'm not saying she can't teach him how to spell or do math. I'm not saying that. I know some very excellent academic white instructors. But what I'm saying is the number one thing that a black boy has to be prepared for is how to control his emotions in the face of unfair treatment by Europeans. Because if he cannot do that, his life will be extremely difficult. And the only person who can prepare a black boy to control his emotions in the face of unfair white treatment is a black man. Right. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's what we're saying. And sisters, you got to stop going around saying that I can raise a son all by myself. No, you cannot. And brothers, we got to stop running around because a lot of us got custody too. And we got to stop running around saying we can raise our daughters all by ourselves. You can raise a healthy adult woman, but you cannot make that girl into a woman. It takes one to know one because it's a spiritual something that they got to get from somebody who already has it. So we need women to make women, and we need men to make men. None of us can do it on our own. And one of the reasons why our children are walking around so angry, so full of hatred, so full of venom is because they know that they need both, but we keep telling them they got to be satisfied with one. And then a lot of us are marrying people who we know don't give a damn about our children. That's right. So I know girls who hate their fathers because he married a woman who he know don't like me. Or I know boys who hate their mothers because she married a man who she know don't like me. Now we understand we all gotta have our lives outside of our children, but you gotta make sure you choose somebody who respects your children. Because to be quite honest with you, nobody can truly respect you if you allow them to get away without respecting your children. Psychotherapy is $1 billion industry. I know children who've been getting wraparound services and behavior specialist services and home mobile therapy services for years, and they still just as sick as when they went in. Because psychology is all about money. The psychoeconomics, very rarely do you find someone who's what? Good enough to put in the work necessary to move a person from depression to health, from anxiety to health, from social anxiety to health, from an anger issue to health. Because it's all about the money. In fact, in some states, you can't even get reimbursed for your therapy unless you diagnose. You can't get reimbursed for your evaluation unless you diagnose. So you got kids who are being diagnosed with problems they don't have just so we can get a penny or two. We got to stop that. We got to stop that. See, a good therapist is like a good teacher. It doesn't matter how many degrees I got. If I sit down with your child to do therapy, I got to be able to connect with your child. Do you understand? It's the same thing with teachers. When I do professional development, I get teachers, black ones too, who say, well, you know, my PhD is in this from Harvard, and I'm a senior career teacher, and I've been teaching for 25 years. Don't none of that mean nothing. I got one question. Can you connect with those 25 in that class? Yeah. Your degrees don't mean nothing to me. Where you got them from don't mean nothing to me. How long you've been teaching don't mean nothing to me. But the problem is what? The control that the unions have over education. The American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association are two teacher union monopolies. Now hear me well. I don't have a problem with teachers being represented. I've seen teachers get mistreated, black and white, and I think they have a right to representation, somebody to grieve their wrongs. But when the power of the union is so strong that it prevents me, the principal, from getting rid of teachers who I know ain't teaching, something's wrong with that union. Do you understand what I mean? When the power is so great that a teacher can be granted permanent tenure just because she's been on the job for 3 years and has not demonstrated that she's effective, I got a problem with that. And the problem with American public education is that you are guaranteed your job for the rest of your life as long as you've been on the job for 3 years. Now, I don't know of another job anywhere where you will have it for the rest of your life just for being there for 3 years. Despite all the complaining that some teachers make, they have the greatest job security of all professionals in America. Did you know that? That's right. Lawyers are disbarred, and doctors lose their licenses far more often than teachers are fired. In fact, you got to do something quite excessive to get fired as a public school teacher. But one thing we know for sure that you will never be fired for, and that is miseducating black children. So we talk about absence of daddy from the home disorder. This Wall Street disorder. I call this the Wall Street disorder. Because Wall Street is getting rich off of this label. And we know that these labels come from what? The Federal Anti-Violence Initiative. Study the Federal Anti-Violence Initiative. In the 1980s, the federal government spent money researching whether or not black men had a gene that predisposed us to be violent. Y'all remember the newspapers, right? Or they killed each other because they just made that way? They just born that way? Ain't nobody say nothing about racism. Ain't nobody say nothing about joblessness. Ain't nobody say anything about miseducation. They just said black men are killing other black men because they got a gene that make them do it. That's eugenics. Whenever you hear somebody start talking about genes, you know they're talking about racial extermination at the same time. The United States of America considers what to be the top threat to national security. Well, guess what it is? It's not terrorism. According to the United States government, the #1 threat to national security is overpopulation. You know what that means? Too many colors. Too many colors. And we know that's where HIV/AIDS came from. If you don't believe it, there's a book that you need to read called State Origin of HIV, written by the name of Boyd Graves. Please read his book, State Origin of HIV. Boyd Graves shows you with federal documentation that AIDS was developed at the U.S. Army Bioweapons Lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland. It still stands today, and it was designed as a population control strategy, and that the AIDS virus selectively binds to genes that have an overabundance of the molecule of melanin within them. We know this for a fact. You see, population control, reducing the numbers of black folk. Now, how does this relate to ADHD? It's because some of these drugs, and I want to read you some of the side effects of some of these drugs so you don't think I'm making them up. What's one of the side effects of these drugs? It can make you sterile. That's right. Did you know that?
Yes.
You're giving your son a brain drug so he can sit still long enough to be miseducated. And so when he's finally self-educated at 25 and he takes his wife and he's ready to have a child, he find out he can't have one. Because you let him get doped up. This is the new Tuskegee. This ADHD thing ain't nothing but Tuskegee all over again. But the difference between the Tuskegee experiment and the ADHD experiment is with Tuskegee, we didn't know what they were doing. We know what they're doing and still sending our kids to the psychiatrist for a script. And then we got pediatricians writing prescriptions. And most of them don't even have adequate mental health training. They just giving out scripts. I had to call a pediatrician up last week. Why you get your child drugs? Because the mom came in and said the teacher was complaining. You don't give no drug for that. You don't give no drug for that. And I'm going to tell you all something too. The next time a teacher calls you talking about your child is disruptive and you need to do something about it, what you need to do is you need to hire somebody, a psychologist, to go in and observe your child in the classroom. 3 different days, 3 different times, 3 different conditions. Why do you want to do that? Because I'm finding that when I go into the classroom to observe these boys who the teachers are complaining about, I'm finding that they are exaggerating the degree of the behavioral problem. Are y'all listening to me? I had a kindergarten boy last week at a Catholic school. Not only did I observe him 3 times, I observed him 6 times, and I even let the teacher and the principal choose when I come to see him. And I found absolutely nothing. My conclusion was what? And I had to tell the teacher this to her face. Your problem is not with his behavior. Your problem is with who he is.
Yes. Thank you.
See, black folk, we gotta stop trying to ignore racism. When you ignore racism, you allow white supremacy to get away with murder. You got a bad habit of talking about, I don't want to talk about the race card. America ain't no race card, it's a racial reality. The whole thing was founded on racism. I don't want to play a race card. Every card is a race card. Now, let me read you the criteria for ADHD. Listen to this. Often fails to give close attention to detail, has difficulty sustaining attention, does not listen to when spoken to directly, does not follow through on instructions, has difficulty organizing tasks and activities, often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort, often loses things necessary for tasks, is easily distracted, is forgetful in daily activities, fidgets with hand or feet, leaves the seat in classroom when they're supposed to stay seated, runs or climbs excessively when it's inappropriate, has difficulty playing quietly, is often on the go, talks excessively, blurts out answers, has difficulty waiting for their turn, and interrupts on others. Now let me ask you a question. Is there any human being you know who does not qualify for a diagnosis of ADHD? And so now you see why half the boys in some classrooms are diagnosed. Because it's so easy for anybody to catch the label, that's by design. Because about 30 years ago, we know what? What happened with the American Psychiatric Association? It almost went bankrupt, did it not? Yeah. Who bailed them out? The drug companies. Did y'all hear what I just said? So the mental health professional associations are indebted to the drug companies. Right. So the drug companies are coming up with diagnoses and they putting them right in here. Father called me yesterday, Dr. Umar, should I get my son evaluated for ADHD? I said, can I ask you one question? He said, sure. I said, do you believe in drugs? No, I don't want him on no drugs. So what do you want the label for? The label is nothing more than a conduit for the medication. Are y'all listening to me? It's nothing more than a conduit. And all across America, Child Protective Services is doing what? Taking kids out of the homes of parents who refuse to give their children medicine that was prescribed by the psychiatrist. Which is why I'm telling you, parents, stop looking for evaluations. Stop looking for evaluations unless they're absolutely necessary and if you can trust the person doing the evaluating. Okay? Because if you ask the psychiatrist if my son is crazy, what are you doing taking a 10-year-old black boy to a 60-year-old white man asking him if the 10-year-old black boy is crazy? You crazy. Does that make any sense to y'all? No. Slavery over and we still asking them to solve our problems. It don't make any sense. Now, up until 1972, there was a diagnosis in this book called homosexuality. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association had a conference over here in California, I believe, where they voted to take homosexuality out of this book. In April of 1974, the year I was born, when the DSM-6 printing came out, homosexuality was no longer contained in this document. The same year, 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger penned a national security memorandum that dealt exclusively with population control. He recommended in that document that sex education should be taught in schools as a way to lower the growing population rate. And then the homosexual movement was born from that. In fact, California, you guys, 2 months ago, passed America's first mandatory homosexual curriculum law, where the children now have to be taught about the accomplishments and history of homosexual people. In New York City, they legalized the gay marriage. Listen to me well. I want you to be clear, because I do therapy with homosexual boys, and I do not believe that we should impugn or deny human rights to anyone regardless of their illness. But I do want to say this. My 9-year-old daughter ain't got no business in nobody's school learning about gayness or heterosexual sex. Are y'all listening to me? So for me, it ain't even about the orientation. That's not nothing a child's supposed to have. My child should not pick up a book and see 2 women couple in a cartoon, or a 2-man family in a cartoon. I got a problem with that. Because see, there's a fine line between what? Education and propagation. Are y'all listening to me? Guess what? This generation of black school children are the first generation who will have to make a conscious decision as to whether or not they want to live their lives as a man or a woman. When I went through school, I was never given that option. But your children now have that option of deciding which way they want to go. And I want to dispel some stereotypes based on my own experience as a therapist. And I want you to be clear on this. Every black boy that I have ever done therapy with who was a homosexual was molested by the age of 12. Nearly every black girl who I've done therapy with who was a lesbian was either sexually violated or saw a woman physically abused by a man in her life. So for those who argue nature over nurture, I got some evidence that suggests otherwise. See, when a black boy grows up without his father, he's still craving that masculine energy. And if he doesn't get it, it can be manipulated by an older male into a homosexual relationship. When girls grow up seeing their mother cry day after day, being mistreated and abused by their mother, they can develop a hatred syndrome for black men, and that crystallizes into lesbian behavior. So you see, we got some real true causes of this in our culture. I can't speak for other people's culture, because Sigmund Freud said homosexuality was natural for a developing boy. Carl Jung said homosexuality was natural for a developing boy. Alfred Adler said homosexuality was healthy for a developing boy. So I understand that in certain cultures, there's nothing wrong with 2 boys getting together for a little foozy-woozy. But in my culture, we don't agree with that. And we have a right not to. And please stop confusing the homosexual struggle with the black rights struggle. That's too much. Please stop doing that. Well, we have to stand up for because they are minority. First of all, I'm not a minority. There's 6 million people on the planet and 1/3 of them look like me. How the hell am I a minority? Stop letting your enemy define you, because he will define you out of existence. And one of the biggest mistakes we made in the post-civil rights movement was allowing people to define us as minority and clump us in with other people of color who also don't care about you. And so when they give out the contracts in Los Angeles, they say, well, we got a 15% set aside. And then you look on the list of everybody who got a contract, now one of them was black. You go to the mayor, you said, Mayor, I thought it was a 15% set aside for people of color. He said it was. And you said, well, there ain't no black people on it. He said it had to be. But they're all people of color. So what we got to do is start fighting for black rights, African American rights. I wish goodwill to every other color under the sun, but my obligation is to myself first and my people first. And to that I say that I want absolutely and unapologetically African. You must be absolutely and unapologetically African. Nobody else is afraid to be who and what they are but us. And we got to stop doing that. Stop doing that. And we got to teach our children who they are. It's okay to give them religion. I ain't got a problem with no religion out there, but I do got a problem with how you teach it. And if you got little black boys and girls growing up worshiping a European Christ, we got a problem. If you got them growing up worshiping an Arab Muhammad, we got a problem. If you listen to Christian, ain't nothing wrong with that. But the deity should never look like your enemy. The deity looks like your enemy. If you are voluntarily committing yourself to slavery all over again.
Yes.
Because the brain stores all images as pictures.
That's right.
All images as pictures. So it doesn't matter how much I tell a black child that Christ is African. It doesn't matter. If you keep on force-feeding that European version, Michelangelo's uncle, into that baby's head.
Right.
Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Then the subconscious will automatically grab onto the image because that's what the brain is. It is an image device.
That's right.
It ain't a word device. It's images. And so we got to be crystal clear about the image diet that we give to our children. You know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to flip to something.
Can't be talking about these people Tyler Perry and Jesus. They're gonna be mad.
These are the 5 stages of the psychoacademic war against black boys. First, you miseducate. Then you psychotropically medicate. Then you incarcerate. And then you socially and economically castrate. And then you exterminate. Now let me say this. Black people, we have to stop letting our ignorance be used against us. I'm starting to hear too many black people say it's good that they're getting locked up because they shouldn't be on the corner selling the drugs. But the question is, how did they get to the corner and who supplied them with the drugs? You understand? Now, if we go back in American history 75 years ago, last time I checked, Bugsy Siegel wasn't black. Meyer Lansky wasn't black. B.B. Siegel wasn't black. Are y'all listening to me? These were Southern European immigrants who were discriminated against because they had a little bit of your genes in their body. In fact, they used to call them Guinea. Okay? The Irish, the Italian, the Jew, they were discriminated against, but in the 1920s, the government decided to absorb them into the social order. So the crime and the underworld that they controlled was given over to black people. Black men sell drugs when they can't do what? Find a job to earn a living, to put food in their baby's stomach, and a roof over their head, and clothes on their back. And I'm getting sick and tired of hearing bougie, snobby, talented, self-righteous Negroes condemn black people who don't got no opportunity, when we should be out there fighting to give them an opportunity. Okay? We got to be crystal clear, and we got to stop letting the church and the mosque get away with doing nothing. I'm getting sick and tired of them collecting millions of dollars because you're not sending it up to Jesus, you're sending it to white banks, the same white banks that are gentrifying the neighborhood and pushing black people out of their own place of dwelling. But you got to hold them accountable. You got to absolutely hold them accountable. I'm about to bring this to a close.
Dr. Umar.
Yes, sir.
Since you started 15 minutes late, the we'll give you 15 more minutes. Yeah.
Let's start at 5, 6. Okay.
They come from Philly.
Light skin supremacy. We got to talk about that.
All right.
In the black community, we still got grandmamas looking at babies when they come out of the womb, looking at the back of their ear to see how dark they want to get. I got children who I do counsel with who got permanent self-esteem damage because my grandmother or grandfather never takes me out. They only take my little brother, my big brother, because they got good hair and light skin. We got to stop doing that, black folk. Stop worshiping skin tone. I don't care if you're buttered pecan or vanilla or chocolate, we all beautiful. And we got to recognize the reason why we got all these different colors and shades anyway, because we done got all mixed up with other people, and some of us are still psychologically mixed up with other people. Okay? An African is an African, whether they got one black parent or two. So that includes our biracial brothers and sisters. They are ours as well. They ain't got nowhere else to go. They belong to us. Stop trying to push them away. And when I talk about light skin supremacy, I'm not talking about light skinned people, because most of the light skin supremacists I know are dark skinned, blue, black, purple. Clarence Thomas is dark as can be, but Clarence Thomas is a light skinned supremacist. You don't see nobody around him if they don't pass the brown paper bag test or better. In fact, did you know that Clarence Thomas was married to George Bush's cousin? Did you know that Clarence Thomas married Rush Limbaugh in his own house? He happens to be an ordained minister. The most self-hating black man in America is a minister. Doesn't that tell you something? Let's talk about the black aristocracy. One of the side effects of the civil rights movement was that it gave birth to a class of educated, well-placed black people who are used to keep the rest of you in your place. I'm not from Los Angeles, but I'm willing to bet that you got a black aristocracy, a talented tenth, a clique of Negroes who think they're better than every other Negro, but who serve the interests of the social order. And there's 5 families within that black aristocracy. I don't use black bourgeoisie that much, because bourgeoisie is a Marxist term that speaks about wealth. They don't own any wealth. They just make a lot of money. Do you follow? Okay. When we got out of slavery, we owned what? 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. Today, with all of our Oprah Winfrey's and Bill Cosby's and basketball players, we still only own 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. We have to acquire industries and we have to acquire institutions. Those are the 2 things that black people need. Where are your supermarkets? Where are your airlines? Where are your submarines? Where are your distribution companies? Why is Michael Jackson dead right now? The reason Michael Jackson is dead is Michael Jackson was plotting to build America's first major black independent music label. Because you don't have one. Rockefeller's not independent, that belonged to Universal. G-Unit is not independent, that belonged to Interscope. You ain't got no black independent labels. And Michael Jackson owned what? Michael Jackson owned 100% of the Beatles catalog. So every time you listen to a Beatles song or buy a Beatles album, Michael Jackson got paid. And so somebody wanted that catalog back, called Sony Records. They wanted the catalog back, and Mike said, I'm not giving you the catalog back. So somebody made Mike a deal to go on tour. And Mike said, I'm going to go on tour. 20 concerts, they sold out overnight. They said, wait a minute, this man might still got the buzz he had 50 years ago. So they said, would you mind doing 30 more? He said, sure. So now Mike got 50 concerts. Had Mike been able to do his concerts, he would have made enough money to pay off the debt he owed Sony and keep the Beatles catalog. So the only way to get that Beatles catalog from Michael Jackson was to kill him before he went on tour. And that's exactly what they did. Michael Jackson is dead is because as a black man, he owned the rights to the most popular white group in American history, which is an absolute sin in white supremacy code. So what are the 5 families? You got black folk in entertainment who miseducate through music. You got black folk in movies, and you got black folk in education. These are the PhDs, the PsyDs, the MDs, the JDs, who don't do nothing in the HOODs. Then you got status Negroes. High place, right? I'm the chief of police. I'm the chair of the school board. I'm the president of this. I'm the overseer of that. It doesn't mean, I need 10 more. And then you got religion. Black folk in religion. Okay? That's the most dangerous. Why is that the most dangerous? Because you're talking about spiritual incarceration. See, when you incarcerate that spirit, you got a big problem going on. And then the spiritually incarcerated will fight for the right to be spiritually incarcerated. Whenever you study war, what are the 3 institutions that are always taken over first in a war? The first is the school, the second is the church, and the third is the military. You take over the school to control the minds of the next generation. You take over the church to control the spirits of the current generation. If you control the school and control the church, you never have to go to war with the people you oppress. You see? And so that's why we have to make sure that the church is independent. We got to make sure the school is independent. 4 Supreme Court cases you need to know about. Brown versus Board. I got mental giftedness in parentheses. Why? Because mental giftedness was used to undermine it. Civil Rights Act of 63, I got LD next to it. Why do I have LD next to it? Because the learning disability was created in Chicago in 1963 to resegregate black children from white children. You have to understand this. You cannot understand special ed without understanding the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Remember, in 54, the Southern school districts refused to integrate. In 64, they were still refusing to integrate. By 74, the federal government needed some way to force white districts to accept black children. And somebody came up with the bright idea. What if we let them resegregate, not in the name of color, but in the name of a disability? And then we're going to pay them for every kid they resegregate. So they made them an offer they couldn't refuse. And you still got black children being resegregated. Not because they got a learning disability, but because they poor and black. Are y'all listening to me? Okay. Which is why we have to go back to the private school movement. We need private schools. We don't need the local school board telling us what to teach our children. And there's 6 subjects that all black children need to be taught that I don't see no school teaching. The first one is agricultural science, how to grow their own food. Yes. We do not know how to grow. We got to get back to George Washington Carver. The second one is political and military science. Black people do not understand how you're being exterminated. You're at war right now, but you fail to recognize war for what it is because you don't see guns. Then we have to give them spiritual science, how to reconnect to the supreme ruler of the universe, which supersedes anybody's religion. Then we got to talk about the science of black family maintenance and development. Black girls don't know how to treat black boys, and black boys don't know how to treat black girls. I'm in the schools with them. They're hitting on each other, cursing each other, disrespecting each other. Black men and black women got a serious schism that the enemy is using to play sides against one another. Then we got to talk about nutritional science. When to eat, what to eat, and how to eat. We got record numbers of obese black children. Yes. Okay? We got record numbers of children with all types of different mental and biological illnesses because of what we feed them. Please stop giving your children the table sugar. Please stop giving them the caffeine, and please stop giving them the #1 killer, which is what? High fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup. Whenever parents come running to me talking about my son got ADHD, the first thing I say, in order for us to really see whether or not he got ADHD, we got to put him on a sugar fast. So for 90 days, it ain't going to be no sugar for him and no sugar for you. So we're going to go to your house and throw out anything on it that got sucrose, fructose, or anything else on the label. And then the parents look at me like I'm crazy. Why? Because they're addicted to the damn sugar. Do you mean I got to give up my Briars? Do you mean I got to give up my Frito-Lays? Yes, you got to give it up. So you see, the kids learn from the parents. So we addicted them to sugar and we wonder why they can't perform in school. Wrapping this up. Okay, when we talk about the learning disability, this is the most diagnosed label in special education. The learning disability. Listen to the definition. The failure on part of a child with normal intelligence to learn a scholastic skill. The failure on part of a child with normal intelligence to learn a scholastic skill. My question to you is this. If your child got normal intelligence, how is it possible they can't learn how to read, write, and do math? Is it the child with the learning disability, or is it the teacher with the instructional disability? Who's really at the core of this right here? And so when we look at the learning disability, good people, you got 8 subtypes. You got basic reading skill. Can your child decode words? Then we got reading fluency. Can the child read at the rate of conversational language? Then we got reading comprehension. Can the child understand what they're reading? Guess what? That skill is not taught well in America. I don't care if the child is black or white, rich or poor. When I'm evaluating children, I'm finding, regardless of race or class, that they cannot understand text. All they can do is speed read. Zoom, 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 zoom. And that's one of the reasons why the standardized test scores for black kids are so low, because they got to keep going back to the passage to get the answer. They can't hold the information in mind. You got to work with them at home. Then you got math computation. Can they add, subtract, divide, and multiply? You got math reasoning. Can they decide on the mathematics operation and then achieve it? Then you got written expression, spelling. That's in writing. Writing is another skill that's taught poorly. And because of the new text messaging, a lot of kids can't write at all. They don't know what a comma is, a semicolon, when to indent, a run-on sentence. And as a result of that, a lot of our kids are getting rejected when they apply to college because when they read the personal statement, it's written like a 3rd grade. So you got to teach your children how to write. Then you got listening comprehension. Can they understand what they hear? And oral expression. Can they effectively articulate? And then Wall Street disorders, right? And then these are the other disabilities. Mental retardation. Be careful. This is one thing I want you to do before you leave here today. Make sure you get my business card off the table. Because if you have to get a report for a black child talking about they're retarded and you don't agree with it, okay, if you don't believe your child, I want you to fax me the report. I'm going to go through it because a lot of our kids are being diagnosed with retardation and they're not. I know because I do a lot of work with special ed lawyers, reevaluating black children and any child of color for that matter, who are being diagnosed as retarded, who are not. Mental retardation is a racially applied diagnosis. So please don't let nobody get away with that. That's the extra money. These are the 6 sciences that I said everyone needed to teach. Tips for parents. Written documentation. Make sure you write down every conversation you have with anybody from the schoolhouse. Write it down. Your documentation is what wins court cases. Their documentation is what's going to get you to get what your child is entitled to. When you go into a meeting and you don't have notes written down and you pull it from your memory, nobody's going to believe that. Always follow up with a meeting with an email. Always follow up a meeting with an email. Get the principal's email, get the teacher's email, get the school psychologist's email. You must follow up with an email, because when you follow up with an email and they do not contradict your understanding of what transpired in that meeting, is just as good as gold. And then you want to review the school day with your children to make sure they're not being taught how to hate themselves, because too many of them are. Don't go to meetings by yourself. You always need a witness, because schools engage in what I call academic amnesia. That's when they selectively forget stuff they knew they told you so they can get away with it. Are you listening to me? Okay, attend all school functions. Let the school know that you care about your child. Too many of us don't care about our kids, and that's why they get mistreated the way that they are. You have to go to the school functions and make sure you're on the blacklist. What is the blacklist? The blacklist is a list that every principal has of the black parents who they know they better never play with. Okay? If you're on the blacklist, you ain't got to worry about nobody telling you your son needs drugs. If you're on the blacklist, you ain't got to worry about nobody telling you to come pick them up. If you're on the blacklist, you ain't got to worry about no exposures. You ain't got to worry about none of that. In fact, soon they hear your child's name, they say, leave them alone. Last thing, whenever we evaluate the behavior of black folk, you evaluate it on 5 criteria. Number 1, consciousness. How knowledgeable are you about the situation that we are facing? Because we all got to be intelligent. A courageous fool is no good to the community. So we must be conscious. Then we must be committed. Because guess what? We know a lot of black folks who are conscious about the problems that affect black folk, but they ain't got no commitment to the community. Are y'all listening to me? Yeah. And then you got to be consistent. Consistency speaks to what? Opportunism. You ever see certain black leaders in the community, you never see them until it's time for them to get some grant money and get their face on the daily news or on the midnight. No. Where were you when we was organized? Where were you when we were going door to door? Where were you when you were raising money? Don't let nobody just come out the woodworks and try to lead your movement, because they're all about what? Promoting their own selves. So we need consistency. Then we need creativity. We got to develop institutions, black folk. We're only going to be saved through our own institutions. We used to have our own hospitals. Where are they now? Where are they now? The research shows us what black folk, even with excellent insurance, still get the same type of treatment as a poor black person in the hood. And then you got to have courage. You got to be willing to confront the system. If you ain't got the guts to confront the system, then you no good to your people. Okay? You got to be willing to confront the system. This is Garveyism right there. And this is what we teach. I'm a follower of the teachings of Marcus Garvey. We teach pride in our race, pride in ourselves as African, unity regardless of skin color, regardless of religion, regardless of language, regardless of nationality. We are all one people. We talk about independent economic power, independent political power. If you want to worship God with an image, it better look like you. Now, if you don't give God an image, that's okay. But if you're going to give him an image, it better not be Michelangelo's uncle and those 13 convicts that he got from the prison to paint that picture. Okay? When was the last supper painted? 1482. Exactly 10 years before Columbus's voyage in 1492. Right. To brainwash people on this side of the earth with the belief that they were superior to you. But then we got to talk about what? African nationhood centralized on the continent in Africa. Black folk, you got to stop thinking you got a future without Africa. You can have a future outside of Africa, but you ain't got a future without Africa. As Africa goes, so do you. If you notice, people from the Middle East still don't get treated as bad as you do, despite the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Why? Because they still have nations with enough self-respect to look out for them. You are the only race of people living in this country who ain't got one nation you can turn to in your time of need. So we got to contribute to the building up of a strong nation in Africa, because as Marcus Garvey said, a strong man is strong everywhere. And then we got to have an independent education, and we got to be courageous and bold enough to speak the truth as the truth needs to be spoken. If you ain't got a free tongue, you're not a free man. And I'll leave you with a quote from my ancestor, Frederick Douglass. I did have another PowerPoint on black male-female relationships, but I know we can't get to it. Maybe at the end. Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are like men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain, but you don't want to deal with the thunder or the lightning. You want the ocean, but you can't stand the awful roar of its waters. He said the struggle might be moral, or it might be physical, or it might be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found the exact measure of injustice that will be reaped upon them. Power conceives nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Thank you.